Unsurprisingly, you're seeing a 300-odd point cut come by for the Dow Jones and a 195-point cut coming in for the Nasdaq. Is this just simply a knee-jerk reaction? And what does the president, the incumbent president of the United States, testing positive just few weeks ahead of the US presidential elections mean for the entire process? I have with me Michael Kugelman, the Deputy Director, the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia with the Wilson Center, and Richard Harris, Chief Executive with Port Shelter Investment Management. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today on the show. Michael, let me go across to you first. And I think first let's understand, just 4 weeks ahead of the election process, we have the incumbent president being afflicted with a disease that, of course, forbids him, or rather, sort of prevents him from carrying out his, the processes that do take place just prior to elections. In all likelihood, the next debate, which is expected to be held just about 15 days from now, is expected to be cancelled. How do you see the entire U.S. elections essentially now transpire?
Well, set aside the timing, but, the simple fact that the president has caught a virus with no vaccine that has killed 200,000 Americans, this is a really huge development. And so not surprisingly, as you noted, the markets have been impacted in a significant way. And of course, coming before just 4 weeks before the election, this is really extraordinary. I think that for many of Trump's critics and even many of his supporters, I think that the main reaction here will be karma, that he had this coming for him. This is someone that for so long had really mocked the population, those in America that have worn masks. And he mocked Joe Biden during his debate with him the other day. And many people will say, well, President Trump has got his comeuppance now. I think that the immediate impact on the campaign will be that Trump will, of course, not be able to go out and do these rallies that he was doing. He draws on those. He likes to revel. He revels in firing up crowds. He draws a lot of passion from that. It fires up his base. There won't be any of that, perhaps, until Election Day. It'll be interesting to see how Joe Biden responds. There had been a very supportive tweet that Biden sent just a bit ago, saying that he hopes that President Trump feels better. Biden may ease up on his attacks on the president. We'll see. I think in terms of the impacts on the election itself and Trump's electoral prospects, I don't think there would be all that much harm for him. One could argue that Trump's supporters will see that their man is not invincible. I think that many of the supporters had thought that he was seemingly able to get through anything. Someone that didn't wear a mask, was around people that had coronavirus, and he had been fine. I think now they'll see that he's vulnerable. But that could simply humanize him in the eyes of his supporters even more than he already had been. People who adore him for so many reasons, they'll see him as just like them, someone that can get the virus. Final point, I do think there could be a bounce, a boost for Trump in terms of undecided voters. Most Americans, I think, have already decided on who they're going to vote for. But for those that are still on the fence, and for those American voters who have liked Trump, who have generally been comfortable with voting for Republicans, but in recent months or even recent years have been unhappy with some of Trump's policies and weren't sure whether to vote for him again or not, well, they could give him a sympathy vote if he does get sick, if he has symptoms, and if he's sick up until the election, that could provoke them to vote for him in that regard. But bottom line, I don't think there'll be all that much of an impact on the actual election at the end of the day.
Okay, let's just now delve in a bit more into the market impact that we are witnessing. Richard, we were seeing cuts of 1% come by, though, mind you, I think the Dow, the S&P are all trying to sort of erase some of those losses. But do you think this is largely just a knee-jerk reaction that we are witnessing? And it's, of course, the United States, as usual, is not isolated. We've seen Germany, we're seeing France, all of them losing, 0.8%, 0.3%, 0.5%. It's basically a sea of red for all the equity markets that are open. But do you just see this as a knee-jerk reaction with not much in terms of more medium-term ramifications for the equity markets worldwide?
I do. And in fact, I think it's very temporary indeed. I mean, as your last speaker was just saying, the overall impact, I mean, there are all sorts of narratives that come from this particular story, but I think the overall impact is likely to be relatively limited. politically, it's quite a sensitive time for Biden because he has got to be very careful that he doesn't spur any form of sympathy vote for Trump by being too aggressive. So it's his to lose at the moment, and it was his to lose because after the debate we saw the other day, Biden was ahead. He had Trump on the ropes. And this for Trump, in a way, is the bell. And it remains to be seen will he be saved by the bell. For the markets, I think the markets are still uncertain about whether a Trump victory or Biden victory would be good for share prices, bond prices, whatever, because we don't really know what policies either of them are going to come up with. So I think the markets are still in this position of uncertainty, of not really knowing, just as they were 24 hours ago. And I think the mere fact that the markets are down something like, 1%, maybe 1.5% on the futures at the most earlier in the day, is an indication that there's not really very much out there, very much new to go on, or indeed that the sentiment has got much worse. If we were looking at 5% falls, then I think that would be significant. But I think the kind of falls we're seeing at the moment are nothing more that you see on a quiet Friday.
Just one more question to you, Richard. Do you see that, this could be a trigger for some more buying in safe haven assets? Recently we had seen a bump up come by in the dollar index. Gold, of course, was relatively a bit quiet because of the whole move in dollar. But do you believe that this would perhaps, also cause, a more larger frenzy in the safe haven assets?
I don't think we're going to see a frenzy because, again, at the moment, we're not seeing enormous amount of new uncertainty. We've had uncertainty in the system anyway with the election coming through. There's not really that much more uncertainty unless Trump takes a very strong turn for the worse. And that's probably unlikely on the probabilities. So I don't really see markets pouring into safe haven assets. We're not at that stage yet. The dollar's seen a reasonably volatile year compared to what it has been. It's not just a one-way bet anymore. People have realized that the dollar can go down as well as up, but that was probably inevitable anyway because the dollar has been very strong. So I don't see an awful lot happening at the moment unless we see some significant changes in what's happening in the economy. That may well happen as protection for jobs and protection for companies is lifted in Western markets, in which case we may see a big rise in unemployment. That's probably the next big hurdle we have to face.
Okay. I'm going to roll two questions into one, Michael. Firstly, we do have important states coming in for Donald Trump where he was actually scheduled to sort of make public appearances. I think Arizona, Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken. These are important states for Trump. But you mentioned that, Trump loyalists may not really be very overwhelmed with the fact that, he may not be able to make public appearances. In fact, the whole sympathy vote factor as well is something that you mentioned. So do you believe that even though he has been, he is ailing currently, it may not really put him behind too much? I think, would that largely be your opinion? And secondly, would I be correct in saying that as opposed to, usually when one president hands over to the other president, there's this peaceful transition and then, tweaks and policies are to watch out for. When we compare Trump and Biden, there's actually a huge a large gap in the kind of policies they adopt because Trump was all about the US-China trade war. Biden may be a bit more moderate in that. So in that sense, we could be expecting a huge change in policies and thus for the market. So would I be correct in assuming something like this?
Well, yes, on your first question, indeed, I don't think that Trump will be negatively impacted by not being able to go in person to these swing states that you mentioned. Indeed, as I said before, I think that he does get a big boost from his supporters by actually being in front of them, despite the health regulations. He draws on that energy. He's that type of politician that could really fire people up, and his supporters love that. However, he can just get online and do it. It won't quite be the same, but he'll still be able to communicate with them that way. And I think many of his supporters will be very impressed that he's tested positive for the coronavirus, but he's still going to be talking to them directly only through the internet. So I don't think there'll be any type of negative impact in that regard. In terms of your broader question, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at two candidates with incredibly different visions for how to make this country move forward. I do think that this election is a referendum on many things, but it's a referendum on policies, on issues, but it's also a referendum on a mentality and a philosophy, in the sense that Trump has brought such a radical approach to the U.S. presidency in terms of how he views institutions, in terms of how he views the office itself. It's very unusual. He's probably been the most radical president the U.S. has had in many decades. And so obviously Biden is more of a traditional president in the sense that, he wants to do things the way that they've always been in terms of conventions when it comes to how the office is used and so on. And also in terms of how he sees the U.S. role in the world. He believes in U.S. leadership in ways that Trump is not. So bottom line, indeed, I mean, this is a huge election. And there is some concern that if Trump is declared the loser, especially if it's close, that he could refuse to step down. He's already made some interesting comments about wanting to be a 3-term president, which is not, in fact, constitutional. So it could get a bit messy. We'll see what the result is. But if there is a result that's fairly close, I imagine you'll see Trump protesting it, could try to take it to the courts. And then it could be a rather ugly, drawn-out process, much like we had 20 years ago when the Supreme Court got involved after the election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. So it's going to be a messy few weeks, and it could be a messy few days and weeks after the election as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, completely, Michael. And I guess, that fears following and that loyalty that a section of, the U.S. population does have towards Trump, it's quite unwavering. So I agree. I mean, I don't really see it impacting their loyalty, in a big manner, really. The fact that he cannot make public appearances. But yeah, for now, of course, U.S. equity markets reacting the way they are, a big drop, but that's really being witnessed across the world, with more than 1% of loss being witnessed. Dow has sort of recuperated with just losses of 200 points. Michael, as well as Richard, many thanks for joining us today on ET Now to just discuss this all-important event as it has taken place. President Donald Trump and his wife both testing positive for coronavirus. Mild symptoms, mind you. The statement from the White House is that he is not incapacitated. He can very well perform his duties. He will be doing so, though, from home. However, of course, it's cast a lot of question mark on the second round of debate with Joe Biden, which was scheduled to be held on the 15th of October. In all likelihood, that's going to be rescheduled.